Okay, good evening, comrades, and welcome to the weekly political meeting of Online Communist Forum, hosted by the Provisional Central Committee of the Communist Party of Great Britain. As is usual, this evening's meeting will be introduced by Jack Conrad, who will speak on the main political developments of the week, as is usual, and then of course, at the end of the session, I think Jack's going to speak for about 55 minutes to an hour. There'll be plenty of time for questions and discussions. And I just remind comrades to keep their microphones off during the time that Jack is speaking. Okay, Jack, over to you.
Thank you, Bob. I'll be talking about politics, of course, but I'd also be giving a very brief report of our third meeting of forging communist unity. More of that at the end. Meanwhile, given that we had Winter Communist University, we've missed a bit of politics. And of course, what I'm talking about can't almost be anything else, can it? It's Donald Trump and flooding the zone. There's been so much coming from the White House, from Trump, sitting on a plane, interviewed by CNN or whatever. It's almost impossible. In fact, it is impossible to keep up with, and I'm not going to, and I cannot comment on everything. That's just simply impossible. So I'll just begin with a few highlights. I'm sure you know plenty of others that you could chip in with, but I'll start with foreign aid cut off. Obviously not permanent, but nonetheless a huge gesture in terms of politics, withdrawing the United States from WHO, World Health Organization, no surprise, withdrawing the United States from the COP agreement, no surprise. Attacks on civil rights. So, for example, birthrights, citizenship birthrights in the United States. I know it's being challenged in the courts, but nonetheless, that's come to an end. Sacking of advisors. Greenland. We've had the quote unquote awful phone call as far as the Danish Prime Minister was concerned from Donald Trump, basically saying, I want to buy it. We've also had, of course, as you well know, similar talk from Trump about the Panama Canal. We built it. We want it back. We gave it away. America's been treated unfairly. We know the remarks about Canada and Trudeau being the governor of Canada as opposed to the prime minister of Canada. And what I would say myself on this stuff is that we ought to take it seriously. There's so much commentary in Britain. And I also think the United States, all you need to do is look at Hillary Clinton sitting there in the inauguration ceremony, swearing in Trump when he talked about the Gulf of Mexico being renamed the Gulf of America. This, from her point of view, this is risible. From the point of view of civilized, sensible, liberal individuals, the idea of the United States claiming, Canada, claiming Greenland is beyond the pale. But in reality, we need to recognize that the period of history, at least that I've lived through, is in many ways exceptional in terms of the history of capitalism. And in that sense, I'm sort of reminded of my youth. I joined the Young Communist League as a very, very, very young, immature, 13-year-old. And I do remember distinctly the Communist Party issuing a leaflet. I know I handed it out. And that was the idea that unemployment rising to 250,000 would be such a national scandal that governments and indeed the system would fall. I can remember believing that myself, but I also remember unemployment going up from 250,000 to 500,000 to 1 million. And I think the last figure I can remember in terms of, before they really started to manipulate the figures was something in the order of 3 million. It couldn't happen. Well, it did. And in that sense, yes, we've lived through a period post 1945 where America, in terms of its allies, has been a sort of, dominant power, but in relative terms, a sort of benign power. So we've seen Germany ruined as a result of World War II, but raised out of the ashes. We saw a similar US program with Japan. We saw similar treatment in terms of South Korea. We've been through Carter and human rights. And in that sense, the problem with many on the left and many liberals is that they've absorbed that as if that's somehow natural as far as capitalism is concerned. Well, all you need to do is look back before 1945, and let's forget Latin America, let's forget Southeast Asia, let's forget the history of Africa. But if we think about the history of Europe, before 1945, the idea of foreign conquest, the idea of territorial claims, and that being outrageous, well, is clearly disproved by the history of Europe, not only European colonialism, but the relationship between European powers on the continent of Europe itself. So I personally think we would be very foolish to dismiss, talk of Trump and the United States reclaiming the Panama Canal. I take it seriously. I take the idea of either the United States seizing Greenland or forcing Denmark into a position where the United States hands over, I don't know what, several $1 billion. I don't know what the price of Greenland would be, but I can imagine that happening. And if we think back to the origins of the United States, yes, it's true that they were 13 British, English colonies. But if you look at the origin of their independence and the struggle that they conducted for independence, they thought on a continental scale. They called themselves the Continental Congress. And yes, their vision not only went from sea to shining sea, it also went south, and it also encompassed the north. So in that sense, Trump talking about a greater United States is simply part of the history of the United States, and indeed the history of strong capitalist powers. All we need to do is think of the British Empire, the German Reich, version 2 and version 3, the French Empire, etc., etc., etc. So yes, in terms of liberal opinion, Trump is outrageous, beyond the pale. But I think we actually are seeing a shift from an old, exhausted as far as the United States is concerned, order of where it would benefit its closest allies to a much more aggressive assertion of dominance by the United States. And if I look at Europe, it seems to me not only was the Biden administration prepared to sacrifice Europe in terms of its proxy war in Ukraine, that goes double as far as Trump is concerned. So, for example, if we look at Germany today, I think it's 2 years now of a contracting economy. I'm told by some this is all the fault of Germany being short-sighted and not investing in nuclear power. In my view, it's not about nuclear power. It's about the United States depriving Germany of cheap gas and oil from Russia. Nuclear power is expensive, and what Germany and German industry did rely on is doing a deal with Russia, prior to that, the Soviet Union, of where they would supply cheap oil, cheap gas, and that was the basis of German industry. And it allowed Germany to become, wasn't it, until the rise of China, the world's biggest exporter country, but it was certainly the industrial powerhouse of Europe. And if we look at it now, no cheap oil, no cheap gas. And we all know when it came to Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, it weren't the Russians that blew it up. It wasn't, I don't think, could have been, but I don't think, the Ukrainians. Almost certainly it was the United States. And this is a message: if you defy us, things will be even worse for you. So my expectation is that Trump is leading the United States into a much more aggressive assertion of its dominance. I think Trump has a program, to reverse the relative decline of the United States. In a certain sense, the United States had to decline. If we look at it coming out of World War II, Europe was in ruins. The British Empire was completely in debt to the United States. Britain had already agreed to hand over global domination to the United States. True that there was the Soviet Union, mass communist parties, but in the capitalist world, the United States had no serious challenger. And I think, if I remember my figures correctly, it accounted for something like 50% of global industrial production. So once Germany recovered, once Japan recovered, once Europe had recovered, of course the United States would go into relative decline. And of course we've seen the rise of China, at the behest of the United States. So the United States was bound on one level to go into relative decline. But I think Trump and the US ruling class, at least the Trump wing of the US ruling class, is determined to reverse that relative decline using much more aggressive, much more confrontational measures than we saw under Biden and under previous presidents. And clearly Trump has hit the ground running this time. And, those sections of the left that are saying Trump can't get his program through, maybe they're right. I'm not saying that it's all automatic because the United States is the global hegemon, because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. It's all going to be smooth sailing. On the other hand, I don't want to write it off as this is impossible. It can't happen. The wheels will fall off. I think that would be a dangerous conclusion. Just moving on in terms of this, I think that we need to put the Trump presidency in a wider context of what's going on in global politics. And this really takes me to Germany. I've already mentioned Germany, the most important country in Europe by far. We've got elections coming up. We've had the controversy. I do find it a bit tiresome myself. That's just a me talking. The Elon Musk, was it a Hitler salute? Was it a Mussolini salute? I've seen all sorts of expert opinion, I don't really care. What is significant here is Elon Musk's intervention in the election campaign in Germany, just recent intervention on behalf of the AfD, Alternative for Germany. I haven't looked at the latest opinion polls, except to say that they don't appear to have shifted over recent weeks. In other words, if you take the Christian Democrats and the Bavarian Social Union, don't they call themselves the Bloc or something like that? Either way, if you take the traditional right-wing bloc, it's ahead, way ahead in terms of opinion polls. Opinion polls matter. Of course, at the end of the day, it's people voting that counts, but they're far ahead. But next down the list, okay, a long way behind is AfD. They are second in the polls. Behind them just are the Social Democrats. And then we have the others. Who knows about the Free Democrats? Will they actually have any deputies in Parliament? De Linke? I don't know. Either way, what I would say is not as a prediction, but as a warning. We can do well just to look next door to Germany, to Austria, of where the Freedom Party has gone from being a party of coalition, a junior partner in terms of coalition government. Remember, this is a similar party in broad terms to AfD. It has individuals with links, in the SS, and this person said that about the Third Reich and all the rest of it. But this was a party that they said that there would be a firewall barring it from government. Well, when the arithmetic didn't work out, the Freedom Party came in as a junior coalition partner. Well, what happened in terms of the last elections in Austria is the Freedom Party emerged as the largest party. And we had negotiations between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, the Conservatives and the so-called socialists. Couldn't come to a deal. And therefore, we've had the Freedom Party become the potential main coalition partner. Well, that doesn't look like it will happen in Germany. But the idea that AfD couldn't become the junior partner, I think would be very foolish to discount. And I think would also be very foolish looking at Germany's situation at the moment, not just because of migrants, but also because of Trump, also because of a much more aggressive much more aggressive United States. I think it would be very foolish to imagine that AfD not only could become a coalition partner, a junior coalition partner, if the arithmetic didn't work out for some, was it red, blue, traffic light, whatever coalition that normally happens, or the Greens, yeah, that's right, coalition, that sort of coalition. The point I'm making is that we'd be very foolish to write off the possibility of AfD becoming the biggest party. Why? Because Germany faces Germany's historic problem, and that is in the context of its industry, it needs a market. It needs a near abroad to it. It needs Europe with free trade. It needs a German empire, in other words. This is the nature of capitalism. So if we look elsewhere in the world, we've got Russia, right-wing government, India, right-wing government, Hungary, obviously, right-wing government, Turkey, right-wing government. You can carry on down the list. The difference is with the United States, of course, it's the global hegemon. And where India, the Modi government, can impose very unpleasant conditions on, for example, the huge Muslim population in India. I think it's got the biggest Muslim population, isn't it? either in the world or outside Pakistan. Either way, they are being treated as second-class citizens. The difference is that in the United States, of course, Trump is ordering the deportation of migrants. He's cancelled citizenship rights for people born of migrants in the United States. He's threatening all sorts of, oppressive measures against trans people, against women, you name it. This flood of presidential announcements has come forth. The main difference is the United States can operate on a global level. And that's why we should take everything that Trump says seriously and not fall for the temptation of dismissing him as mad, crazy. Far from it. This is the world that we're going into. This is the world that we are going to inhabit. And if we look at this week's Weekly Worker, we've got an article, I think it's a good article, by our comrade Ford, and he quotes actuaries who are people not normally prone to excitement. These are people in the insurance and reinsurance business who are increasingly being employed by governments to say what's the future hold. And they seriously, are talking about, I think you have to say a 50%, this is the worst case scenario, I admit, but a 50% drop in global GDP, that's a civilizational collapse. Now, when this report was initially carried or reported on, written up in The Guardian, they made a mistake, and they said that this body of actuaries is predicting a 50% fall in GDP growth by 2070, and they had to correct it. No, it's not 50% fall in economic growth. It's talking about a 50% drop in economic activity. That is the world. I mean, I won't be living in it, but that's the world that we'll be going towards. And in that context, I just thought there was a worthwhile article, a peculiar article that caught my attention in of all papers, the Daily Mail. And I don't know, partially this is a sort of prurient article, but in half it's a serious article. And this is about the Davos conference. What is it, 3,000 delegates going up, meeting together in Switzerland. Well, what this is a report of what goes on behind the scenes, in the hotels, and more than that, in the bedrooms of the delegates. Because what happens with a Davos conference, like all of these, COP and all these gatherings of powerful men in politics and business, is what you have is, to use a polite euphemism, high-class call girls, beam in, and either, I don't know how it works, but either, they send out text to the phones, or I don't know. Either way, what's interesting about this Daily Mail report isn't the sexual kinks of various delegates to the Davos conference. It's the fact that these delegates, this is what the prostitutes are reporting, all of the delegates that visited me are talking about the climate crisis. And half of them say we can't do anything about the climate crisis. We're the most powerful men in the world. We can't do anything about it. We cannot stop global warming. We're heading towards disaster. And here I am, I'm having fun because we've only got one life and I might as well enjoy it while I can. The other half go on about the climate crisis and how they can't do anything about it, but apparently it will only affect poor people. It will affect people in the global south. Who cares about them? I'm rich. I live in the north. Who cares? So you've got this report, I think a very revealing report about what these people, I would guess, actually really think, and what they think of us. It sort of reminds me of why, in terms of parliamentarians in Britain and in other countries, why they barred the press, why it was the left that considered reporting Parliament so useful, because it used to be the case in Parliament that members of the ruling class used to tell the truth to each other and what they thought about the great unwashed, the me and yous of the world. As the suffrage increased, the political class got used to lying, and you don't get honesty anymore. The political class selects on the basis of dishonesty. It's like Keir Starmer. People on the left say, well, he lied to us when he said he's going to carry out Jeremy Corbyn's programme. And you read in the bourgeois press, commentators, advisors, spads say, well, of course he would. Of course he lied. That's what politicians do. That's what politicians do in Parliament. But I'm guessing that when it comes to their bedrooms, when it comes to them relaxing, drinking, having a good time, they let their inhibitions go, and they tell something approaching what they actually think. Okay, back. Well, I'd better say on the serious side, but I think that is a serious story. It's got it, as I say, it's purient side, but I think it is also a serious story. Back to Palestine. What have we had? No surprise. There's the Lebanon peace treaty. Israeli troops are meant to withdraw. They haven't withdrawn. People are still being killed. What do we have on the West Bank? Trump removes sanctions on settlers that, token sanctions that Biden had put in place as a sort of gesture to humanity, looking at the genocide in Gaza. Trump gets rid of that, and we have pogroms by settlers on the West Bank. And we also have the Israeli Defense Force going into Jenin. And according to people who are getting out, Jenin is being treated in the same way that Gaza City has been treated. Meanwhile, we've had Donald Trump repeating his talk about, well, Gaza, it's a building site. It's true. I don't know what's going to be built. It's rubble. It's a demolition site. That's certainly true. And he's talked about, well, yeah, it's got sand. It's got sea. What a perfect opportunity to develop it. The problem is that there are Palestinians there. They're the problem. Get rid of them. Now, there has been an argument on the left. Some comrades have taken Netanyahu's claim that the war in Gaza was about two aims: getting the hostages back and destroying Hamas. I have never taken getting all the hostages back as a serious war aim. Some are coming back now. Maybe they'll all go back, but that's not what it's been about. Nor has it been about destroying Hamas. You're not going to destroy Hamas. We've all heard the reports of Hamas recruiting more people than it's lost. No doubt in Gaza, there's some level of demoralization with Hamas. That's to be expected. But the majority of Palestinians live on the West Bank or in the diaspora. And quite frankly, I would be surprised if they haven't been flooded with potential recruits. But no, the real war aim of Netanyahu is about getting rid of the Palestinian population from the occupied territories. And I'd also add that we shouldn't forget also Israel itself, pre-67 Israel. At the moment, we're all looking at Gaza for understandable reasons. We're looking at the West Bank. We shouldn't forget Israel itself. Either way, it seems to me at least that Israel, once this present phase is over, Israel basically is being given permission either to dump people, or there is going to be some Trump brokered deal with Jordan and Egypt accepting Gulf money, Saudi money, maybe American money, I doubt it, for accepting huge numbers of Palestinians who will be forcibly expelled, first of all, from that great real estate opportunity called Gaza, but also, let's not forget, the West Bank either. So again, a horrendous story. And anyone who tells me it cannot happen, it's happened. It's happened in the past. Think about the formation of Israel. Think about what Trump is saying. Think about what they've just done to Gaza. If there's a ray of light here, it's Trump saying, don't do Iran yet. I can negotiate a deal with Iran. Clearly, there's the threat there. He's coming with a big stick. It's called a strike either by Israel or Israel and the United States on its nuclear facilities and who knows what else. Either way, he's saying, hold off. And so who knows what the Iranian leadership will do under those circumstances. Because at the moment, the only sort of serious challenger I can think of, and it's not that serious, but the only serious challenger I can think of to Trump and this new version of the American empire is some sort of China, Russia, Iran alliance. And again, you think about Trump and Kellogg and Zelensky being told trade, peace for land. What's going on there? Trump just wanting a Nobel Prize, or has he got a strategic aim of cleaving away Russia from being the Austro-Hungary of China? I don't know. Either way, the fact of the matter is that China is still very vulnerable to the United States. It's true that the United States cannot just do anything either way. It is going to do a lot, and it is going to produce for us, with Keir Starmer posturing about relations with the EU, signing a 100-year deal with Ukraine. I can see Britain and the Labour government very easily having to eat the poison of humiliation at the hands of Donald Trump. And again, thinking about the longer term, Trump, British politics, we've got a far-right Tory party, we've got reform, but there's also talk, I take it seriously, of Donald's mate, Nigel Farage, doing a non-aggression pact with the Tories. Imagine the next general election. I don't know what the arithmetic is, but imagine instead of having a handful of reform MPs as a result of this pact, this non-aggression pact with the Tories, you ended up as 50 reform MPs. That would make a potential coalition partner, a serious coalition partner, not just a bolt-on, but we demand ministers sort of coalition partner. So this is the world that I fear that we are going towards. And I don't have any faith, and I think the left that does look to this China, Russia, Iran bloc or the BRICS, I think that this is delusional. I have no, how should I put it, faith in their socially progressive program. This is a rival bloc to the United States. We need to look to the working class and the working class movement emerging as a global power in its own right, as opposed to either tailing Russia, China, Iran, taming the US Democrats or the British bourgeois Labour Party. So it's the working class that we look to for an answer. Okay, 36. I try not to speak for over an hour. I think that's easily enough. Thought I would comment on the sentencing of Axel Rudanbana. It's the best you're going to get from me. The killer in Southport of the 4 little girls, the attack on the dance class. To me, the response of mainstream politicians has been appalling. Why? Because they all seem to be talking about prevent, the monitoring bureaucracy that the government put in place to oversee extremist threats. So this is, about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, I don't know, us lot on the left. I mean, I do remember a report that was drawn up at Goldsmiths that mentioned the CPGB because they go on about guns. We haven't ended up on the prevent list. Either way, they now seem to be suggesting that individuals who indulge in individual terrorism. I mean, what the hell did this guy, where's the terrorism? This guy clearly, from everything we get in terms of reports of the court, of what he did on that fateful day, everything about his past, going from a quiet little boy in school to being expelled from school, shows you that he's got severe mental difficulties, which aren't going to be solved by a 52-year prison sentence. So we shouldn't be having a debate about a life sentence as opposed to 52 years. We should be talking about how comes this person was not treated. How comes he got to the stage of where he did get that knife and did unleash his fearful assault. In their own way, the mainstream politicians are reacting in the same irrational way as the rioters did on the following nights after this attack. This is not rational thinking. We need to look at society. What's wrong? What's sick with society that could produce such a disturbed young man? This guy was 17 and clearly had been suffering, is suffering from extraordinary disturbed behavior. So to me, it's not prevent that needs toughening and more people, put in its ridiculous net. We need decent mental health services. I know, in terms of my family, I'm sure people on this call also know from their family, from their friends, maybe themselves, how difficult it is to get mental treatment. Usually you go to the doctor and they say, you say, I'm depressed, and they give you a tablet. I just heard something, by the way, just on passing, on Radio 3, that said, well, music has got as much value in terms of curing people, or not relieving depression as drugs. Either way, we need decent mental health treatment. Mental health should be treated not as the Cinderella service of the NHS. It should be at the top. Everything in terms of the NHS is being run down, but the worst surely is mental health services. Okay, another story from the United States. This is from the CIA with a new director, John Radcliffe. Apparently he wasn't responsible. This is Biden era stuff, but we've had the release of a CIA report saying that COVID-19 had its origins in a lab in Wuhan, and this has hit the headlines. And of course, this was the refrain of the right wing. They knew it was China. Was it deliberate? Perhaps, but it was the Chinese. It was the Chinese Communist Party that unleashed this deadly virus on us. Now, if you ask a scientist, in terms of an expert in this field, and you said, could it have been a lab in Wuhan? They would say, well, I can't discount it. It is a possibility, and it's worthwhile looking at this CIA report that has been headlined everywhere. The CIA says it has low confidence in its lab leak theory, low confidence. But clearly, this is weaponized. This is about excusing more sanctions on China. This is precisely Donald Trump threatening Xi with all sorts of terrible measures if China doesn't fall into place and sacrifice its industry and its national interests to the United States. So I take it as not serious news. I take the CIA report as a piece of prostituted investigation. And I would be very interested in terms of what serious, genuine scientists say about this particular idea that it was a lab leak. Of course, we know that scientists, of course they do. Of course, they're looking at bats and they're looking at the possibility of what's going to be the origin of the next pandemic. We all know a pandemic will be coming from. So you study, for example, bats because they have such an incredible immune system. They carry so many viruses about with them. So if you have contact with bats, if you eat bats, very dangerous that you get a species leap from bat either directly to human or bat to some other intermediate species, and we eat that and we get then this mutated virus. That's the origin of most of the diseases that we suffer from. Smallpox, one can go through the list. It's from animals. It's about viruses leaping from one to the other. And it's because we're not used to these new viruses that we go down and we suffer so terribly from them. Small little point, worth making. Made the point that I listen to, Radio 4 News. Sometimes I get frustrated with it and swear at it, but I also listen to Radio 3, who's broadcasting a lot of concerts to mark International Holocaust Memorial Day. Very worthy. But what they tell us and what gets my, gander up is that Radio 3 announces every single time, both in terms of pre-recorded but also live broadcast, that it was Auschwitz that was liberated 80 years ago. True, but apparently it was liberated by Allied troops. Well, yes, it was. Who were the Allied troops? Silence. The word Soviet, or to use their language, Russian, isn't allowed a mention. And this is about the neutral, objective, liberal BBC. And clearly, look, I might be wrong, but this strikes me as management imposing. This is what you're allowed to say, and this is what you're not allowed to say on BBC staff. It's too uniform. It's too much of a packed formula for it simply to be spontaneous. It was Russian soldiers, or actually more accurately, it was Soviet soldiers that liberated Auschwitz. It was the Soviet Union that was an ally against the Nazis in World War II. Lastly, there we are, 45 minutes in, I was reading a little article by Judy Cox. She's a nice SWP activist, very experienced comrade, nice individual, but she's got an article which sort of got my interest, and it was about, do we need leaders? And I thought, well, this might be an interesting article. And basically, she said, well, yes, we need leaders. The problem is with mainstream parties is that the leaders dominate their organization. So we look at Keir Starmer, Nigel Farage. Obviously, we've just been talking about Donald Trump. you know, and the Republican Party, who dominates the Republican Party, its leaders. But then she says the SWP is different. So I go, oh, this looks interesting. Apparently, the SWP doesn't have a passive membership. And I went, what? We've just had an SWP conference, and we, you know, in this organization, CPGB, have been reading, sorry, Judy, the SWP's pre-conference discussion. And we've seen members saying, look, for year after year after year, look, our claimed membership of 5,000 or whatever it is this year, this is nonsense. The majority of these people pay absolutely no dues whatsoever, and we don't see them from year to year. What we do on demonstrations is give out cards and count them as members, and we keep them on the books. These are not members. And until recently, these people had the right, they didn't exercise it, but would have had the right to turn up to a branch meeting and elect a delegate to conference. So the Central Committee changed the rules, changed the, how should I put it, the standing orders there, and said only people who pay dues are allowed to vote in these elections. But finally, this year, they've said, well, yeah, you're right. We ought to just count as members, in terms of our official figures, those that pay dues. Okay, so that's one point. Second point, sorry, Judy, we also read party notes. This is the internal weekly bulletin that comes from the National Secretary of the SWP, basically telling the comrades what to do this week. You know, this is the meetings you ought to be having. These are the demonstrations. This is what's going to be in the next international socialism, that sort of type news. And I remember reading, when you conduct a meeting, what you want to do is limit speeches, contributions from the floor, unless I've forgotten it, I think it was to 3 minutes, because we don't want to put off, quote unquote, ordinary people. And so SWP branch meetings, which have a public speaker, what you have is a chair that doesn't want anyone butting in a me or a you, asking an awkward question and then coming back. And it doesn't want SWP members basically doing anything else. And we've seen them so often getting up and saying, I'm just an ordinary bod and I'm a member of Unison. And what Alex Kalinikos or whoever the speaker just said, I was speaking to someone on the bus stop just as I came to the meeting, and they said exactly the same thing. The government is unpopular and everyone wants to go on strike and the system's just about to collapse. And what indicates in terms of passivity, as far as our comrade Cox is concerned, is that in the SWP, people go on demonstrations and they support strikes. And this is the nature of the SWP. But the fact of the matter is that the SWP breeds passivity in their members. And I'm going to finish with this. And that's thinking back again, I've quoted myself as a very young person. What struck me as a 13, 14, 15-year-old in the Young Communist League is I used to mix, well, I was about to say with the IS, the International Socialists in my hometown. Actually, there was one of them. He was a nice guy called John Barrett. And what struck me about my friend John Barrett was that the IS thought they had factions. And he was able to give me factional documents. And he said, look, I'm more on the anarchist wing. I'm not quite sure if that's accurate. But here are our different groupings. These are our differences on the Soviet Union. And I just thought to myself, well, these guys are thinking about the world. You know, they're not just taking the line from above. They're questioning what Tony Cliff says. They're questioning what Chris Harman is saying. You know, but you look at the SWP now, you don't find that. You don't find any theoretical thinking. You don't find anything of a radical nature. What you get is a passive membership, a membership that's full of grumps and gripes, but not a politically educated membership. And we would hope that that will change. It needs to change in the future if we're going to progress left unity. And with that, I will give a very, very brief report of our third meeting of what is now called, what the hell is it? FCU.
Forging
Communist Unity. I know, thank you. Fusing Communist Unity. Right, well, we had three organizations there. We had TAS talking about socialism. We had Prometheus, two comrades from Prometheus, and me from the CPGB. What we did is we carried on with our last meeting, and the last meeting began basically with a report back in terms of what do our membership, what do our leading committees think about this progress. I was able to say CPGB fully behind it, PCC's fully behind it, last aggregate fully behind it. Comrades from TAS were able to say, well, our leadership is fully behind it. We've just had our version of an aggregate where we've had our circle of supporters and friends. They were in general very enthusiastic about it. And then we had the report from Prometheus. We had, as I said, two comrades. This is though with one of the comrades from TAS wearing two hats. So Comrade Ed is both a member of TAS, but also a member of the editorial board of Prometheus. We had him there, and we had Comrade Cat. Either way, we had a report from Prometheus, and they are going at a slower pace than the other two organizations. The other two organizations are fully on board. At some point in our journey, we will formally accept the idea that a founding conference will bind us as individuals to the outcome of any vote, right? That's an important principle. Prometheus has issued a statement saying that they are for the talks, but in terms of the individuals on the editorial board, they are all at different levels and at different speeds. And so we have, I don't think it's unfair to say that the two comrades at the meeting on Saturday, that's Kat and Ed, the advance guard. They are going fastest. They are up for it. They are our best fighters for it. On the other hand, if we look at the rest of the comrades in Prometheus, you've got a range of opinions which go from, well, yeah, really good, to, I don't know whether you want to call it hostility or skepticism. I don't want to characterize it. But yes, there is a very backward element. And one of the concerns that was raised in terms of the report back, which is very important, was the idea that, look, some of us in Prometheus are also involved in RS21. And we've reported, you know, the positive progress that the comrades have made in terms of breaking RS21 from social imperialism, positive progress in committing RS21 to a quote unquote communist horizon. That concern was expressed that if the process of communist fusion was continued, would that work come to an end? And certainly when it came to my contribution, and other comrades agreed with me, I said, look, I cannot speak for the future organization, can only speak for myself, but I can speak in terms of the history we in the CPGB have had. The last thing we would want is the comrades ceasing their intervention, ceasing their involvement with RS21. We would be encourage them to continue with that struggle, but with the proviso that we would privately issue a warning. Don't count on the toleration of the right wing in RS21 that might well at the moment be full of, oh, isn't it nice to talk about ideas? They might easily take a hostile view. But what we agreed to do is right from fusing communist unity as a group to the editorial board, saying that we would be requesting a meeting with the editorial board, with myself and Nick Rack. And we agreed that we're writing to the comrades, and we will meet them either on Zoom or, much better, face-to-face in London would be the obvious place, but doesn't have to be, but in London for a day's meeting. So not just an hour, let's get to know the comrades, let's hear the doubts, let's find the extreme skeptics, or maybe those that are actually hostile to the idea of a fusion, because let's remember that fusion also goes hand in hand with splits. It isn't just about all getting together, it's about differentiating. So if we think back to the formation of the CPGB in 1920, it involved splits in Pankhurst's organization, including with Pankhurst. It involved a split with the Socialist Labour Party. And indeed, the Communist Unity Group came out of that organization. So it seems to me to be very positive. I'm very encouraged. We agreed that the next meeting in 2 weeks' time, which will be on a Sunday, will involve someone else as well as myself from the PCC. This is something I put forward. Comrades said, yeah, that's a good idea. Because what we're now doing is we're going from the preliminary stage to actually discussing, saw it published in the Weekly Worker in my last article, the agenda put forward by TAS. We will be dealing with point 1 of that discussion. We also, and comrades will be interested in this one, we also discussed why Marx, and I explained the problems that we'd initially had with the agenda that was sent out to the comrades rejected at the second meeting. Since then, we've had a third, and I think I could be wrong, a fourth draft. Either way, the long and the short of it has been, is myself and comrades on the PCC have had a role in shaping the agenda of this series of why Marx. At the moment, my understanding is, well, my understanding at the moment is, but because the comrades in TAS saw my article and said, look, the PCC is clearly not happy with this series. We weren't, I wasn't. We're going to steer clear of it. Now, they haven't made up their mind about the new draft, but they do note that we are, from the PCC, participating. We'll support that. But I want to hesitate because I think, for example, the launch meeting might have to be delayed. Now, this is not something I'm deciding. It's just advice, because my understanding from CAT, from the editorial board, is that no one is available for the launch meeting from Prometheus. I would very much hope that TAS comes on board. The last thing we want is to launch, this series of talks on communist unity with just a comrade from the PCC. You want 3 organizations there. So that's just timing. But I think the spirit is there. There is a fear that maybe debates will have a crossover. Either way, the spirit is positive. I'm very optimistic about it. And I'm also optimistic, as are the other comrades, that this is actually having a genuine impact on the wider left. This is being noted you know, in terms of the organized left, but also not just the sects of 1 and 2, but those comrades that have had the hope kicked out of them by bad experience in one of the sects. So things are positive. It doesn't mean that we're putting all our eggs in that basket, but at the moment, things, you know, in terms of the third meeting were highly positive, and it, to me at least, looks very positive in terms of the meeting in a couple of weeks' time for our fourth meeting. So with that optimistic note, Bob, I hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jack. Anybody who'd like to speak, I've already seen one comrade's got his hand up. Please do so. I'm aware that some people aren't panelists, so if you would like to speak and attend this meeting, would you raise your hand, please, so we can make you to panelists and then you'll be able to talk. Before I bring Joseph in, I'm just gonna like to ask you a question myself, John. Just on Trump, really. I mean, reading the papers this week, Trump administration now has 13 billionaires in his government, and it's reported that his cabinet is worth around 7 billion plus. And I think the important thing, and he's got no dissenters within his cabinet. Just before Christmas, there was some joke about him potentially standing in for a third time, and that's been raised again now over the last week. Now, do you think that's just posturing, or do you think that's an actual something that he could run with to gather, I don't know, grassroots, so it can become a serious ambition of his, particularly if he's going to galvanize the right wing of America and they have faith in his ideas? Yeah, that's it. I do have another one, but I'm going to stop there so I don't abuse the chairs too much. So, Joseph, do you want to unmute yourself and make a contribution? Thank you. Joseph, we can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Hello, can you hear me now?
That's better. Yeah, your Wi-Fi or your internet signal is very bad, Joseph.
Okay, let me
That's better.
let me move and see if I can. Yeah, is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Yes.
Okay.
Don't walk too far.
Perfect. All right. Sorry. Yeah. No, I know. I just need to stay out of the TV. I've got to feed my kids in a minute, which is why I'm commenting now, and so I hope I might get a reply fairly quickly. But yeah. So I've got 2 points. One of which is fairly internal, and if I didn't have the pressing issue of children, then I'd probably ask it later in the discussion. So apologies for asking early. My first point is about Trump, and we had I'm a member of the NEU. We had a meeting of the Socialist Teachers Alliance this week, in which we had speakers leading off on Palestine, Cuba, Trump's attitude to Cuba, and Ukraine, and Trump's attitude to Ukraine. And the speaker on Ukraine did phone me up before that meeting and say, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say about this. And I think that's a reasonable point, because I think Trump on Ukraine has been so back and forth and sporadic and unpredictable that it's very, very kind of, it's very difficult to kind of know exactly what he's going to do. Or obviously, originally had that position that he was going to kind of try and resolve it within 24 hours, which he's now pushed back to 100 days. And yeah, I mean, anyone like George Galloway and people like that who sort of thought that he might have a slightly, he might go both ways on Israel, Palestine, you know, I mean, were always clearly wrong, weren't they? And you see that within the first day, and him saying this bizarre, you know, horrendous stuff about potentially kind of just cleansing out Gaza and all the rest of it. In a way, that was quite predictable. I wonder if Jack had any thoughts on Trump and Ukraine in the early stages. It may be the answer may be I haven't got a clue, because I certainly haven't got a clue, and I've been trying to follow it. But I thought I'd ask that question. and partly just to ask a question that isn't completely internal. But my second question is about the Forging Communist Unity stuff, if that's all right. So Forging Communist Unity, I just feel like there's, I mean, maybe it isn't an elephant in the room, but I think it's just, from my point of view in the trade union movement and having seen the